Last summer, my friends and I decided to take a trip to St. Lucia. We found this beautiful Airbnb, a villa nestled on a hill with stunning views of the ocean. It was supposed to be the perfect escape from our hectic lives. Little did we know, it would turn into a nightmare. There were 4 of us: Rachel, Mike, Jason, and me. We had been friends since college and were looking forward to a week of relaxation and adventure. The first couple of days were bliss. We lounged by the pool, explored the local beaches, and enjoyed the vibrant nightlife. Jason had a persistent headache since we arrived, which he tried to push aside and enjoy their trip. Everything was perfect until the 3rd night. That night, we decided to stay in and have a barbecue. We were laughing, reminiscing about old times, and enjoying the warm Caribbean breeze. Around midnight, Jason started acting strange. He became unusually quiet, staring off into the distance with a vacant look in his eyes. At first, we thought he was just tired, but then things took a turn for the worse. Suddenly, Jason stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. His eyes were wide and unfocused, and he began mumbling incoherently. We asked him if he was okay, but he didn't respond. Instead, he started speaking in a deep, guttural voice that didn't sound like him at all. It was like he was reciting something in a language none of us recognized. We tried to calm him down, but he became more agitated. He started thrashing around, knocking over furniture and breaking dishes. His strength was unnaturally intense. When he couldn't break away from Mike's hold, he turned around and put his hands around Mike's neck, squeezing tightly. It took all 3 of us to restrain him. His face twisted into a terrifying snarl, and he screamed at us to leave him alone, his voice echoing unnaturally in the villa. Rachel was crying, and Mike was visibly shaken. I was trying to stay calm, but deep down, I was terrified. This wasn't the Jason we knew. Something was horribly wrong. We decided to leave the villa immediately and take Jason back home. It took us hours to calm him down enough to get him into the car. As soon as we left the property, Jason's behavior changed. He slumped in his seat and fell into a deep sleep, like nothing had happened. The drive back home was eerily quiet. We were all exhausted and on edge, constantly glancing at Jason to make sure he was okay. When we finally got back home, we took Jason to his parents' house. They were shocked by his condition, but relieved that he seemed to be sleeping peacefully. Over the next few days, his parents kept a close eye on him, and slowly he began to recover. They told us that he was feeling better and invited us all over for dinner. We were hesitant, but agreed to go. When we arrived, Jason greeted us with a big smile. He looked like his old self, cheerful and full of energy. It was hard to believe that just a few days ago, he had been a different person. We sat down for dinner, trying to act normal, but the tension was palpable. As we ate, the conversation inevitably turned to what had happened. Mike was convinced that Jason had experienced some sort of mental breakdown, triggered by stress or exhaustion. Rachel, on the other hand, believed that something supernatural had possessed him. She recounted the strange language and the unnatural strength he had displayed. I found myself torn between the 2 explanations. Part of me wanted to believe that there was a rational explanation for what had happened. But another part of me couldn't shake the feeling that we had encountered something beyond our understanding. Jason, for his part, seemed puzzled by the whole ordeal. He had no memory of the events and dismissed it as a bad dream. As the evening went on, we tried to move past the incident, but the unease lingered. We were all changed by what had happened in that villa. Our once carefree friendship was now shadowed by fear and uncertainty. To this day, we don't talk about that night. It's like an unspoken agreement among us. But every now and then, when I catch a glimpse of the ocean or feel a warm breeze, I'm reminded of our trip to St. Lucia and the darkness that followed us home. Whether it was a possession or a breakdown, I may never know. But one thing is certain. I'll never forget the terror we experienced and the bond that was forever altered by that fateful trip. Welcome back, everyone. Today, I'm going to share a story that has haunted me for years. It's a story about a place called Hillside Cottage, a house that changed my life forever. This is my story. A few years ago, I moved to a small town for a job. At short notice, the letting agent found me a place quickly. Hillside Cottage, a sprawling Victorian-style house that had seen better days. The locals avoided it, and now I know why. The first night was uneventful. I unpacked, cooked dinner, and settled in. But as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a faint whisper. I dismissed it as my imagination. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. A soft voice, indistinguishable but undeniably there. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just the wind. The next day, I explored the town. When I mentioned I was staying at Hillside Cottage, the locals fell silent. One elderly woman grabbed my arm and whispered, "Get out while you can." Her eyes were full of fear, but I laughed it off. Ghost stories, I thought. But I did get a little bit rattled. Now I was thinking about the whispers and the strange feelings I had the previous night. Shaking my head, I decided to ignore these town gossips and folklore. That night, after dinner, I'd settled in an armchair in the living room, reading a book when the whispering returned, accompanied by faint footsteps. It seemed to be coming from the hallway. I searched the house, but found nothing. My rational mind insisted there had to be a logical explanation. I went to bed and locked my bedroom door just in case there was someone in the house. On the third night, things escalated. I was jolted awake by a loud bang. My bedroom door, which I had locked, was wide open. Cold air filled the room, and I saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed. I froze, unable to move. The figure slowly faded away, leaving me in a state of sheer terror. All the doors in the property were locked from inside, and again I searched the property. Fair to say, I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I spent the next day researching the house. I discovered that Hillside Cottage had a dark history. Built in the late 1800s, it was home to the Walton family, known for their involvement in occult practices. Legend had it that the family had summoned a spirit that ultimately led to their demise. The property had been abandoned for decades until a property developer bought it with plans to turn into a bed and breakfast. However, he never followed through. Instead, he gave it to the letting agent to rent out. The Walton family was once the epitome of wealth and influence in the late 19th century. William Walton, the patriarch, was an enigmatic man with a fascination for the occult. His wife, Eleanor, shared his interests, and together they formed a secret society dedicated to exploring the supernatural. Their children, Thomas and Abigail, were often seen at these clandestine gatherings. though it was rumored they were reluctant participants. The family's obsession grew when William obtained an ancient grimoire said to contain rituals that could summon otherworldly entities. Driven by curiosity and a lust for power, the Waltons decided to perform the most dangerous ritual in the book, summoning a demon that could grant them immense knowledge and influence. On a stormy night, the family gathered in the property's basement, which had been transformed into a ritual chamber. They followed the instructions meticulously, drawing intricate symbols and chanting in an ancient language. As the ritual progressed, a chilling wind swept through the room, and the candles flickered violently. Suddenly, the air grew still, and an oppressive silence fell over the chamber. A dark figure materialized before them, its presence suffocating. They were supposed to offer a sacrifice, but Williams thought with the grimoire he had power over the entity, and it would do as he was commanded. The demon was enraged. William, desperate to control the entity, offered his soul. But the demon's wrath was not so easily appeased. It cursed the entire family, condemning them to eternal torment within the walls of Hillside Cottage. The demon disappeared, leaving behind a palpable sense of dread. Over the next few weeks, the family members began to change. William and Eleanor became increasingly erratic. Thomas and Abigail were plagued by terrifying visions and fits of hysteria. The once grand and lively property descended into darkness and despair. One by one, the Waltons met gruesome ends. William was found hanging from the rafters of the attic, a look of abject terror frozen on his face. Eleanor drowned herself in the property's bathtub, her body discovered by the housekeeper. Thomas, driven mad by the relentless whispers, leaped from the house's highest window. Abigail, the last to go, vanished without a trace, her presence still haunting the property. The house was abandoned, and the legend of the Walton family became a cautionary tale whispered among the townsfolk. They believed the demon remained, bound to the property, its fury manifesting in strange occurrences and malevolent apparition. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I set up cameras around the house. The footage revealed what I feared: shadows moving, doors opening and closing, and eerie whispers. The paranormal activity was undeniable. I reached out to a paranormal investigator. He arrived a few days later, armed with equipment. As night fell, he set up cameras and microphones in all the rooms, the corridors, the basement, and kitchen before we settled down in the living room. After 2 hours, there was no movement. The investigator decided to conduct the essence to stir things up. Almost immediately, the temperature dropped and we heard the whispers again. The investigator asked, "Is anyone here with us?" The response was a chilling scream that echoed through the house. The monitors lit up, beeping as it registered movements in the basement and the kitchen. Suddenly, a vase flew across the room, smashed against the wall, sending sharp pieces flying everywhere. Before we could react, the investigator was knocked to the ground by an invisible force, pinning him down. He took out a cross from his pocket and started praying, waving the cross around in hope it would release him. The shadowy figure appeared again, closer this time. It reached out a hand. I started backing away frantically, looking for an escape, until I felt the brick wall of the fireplace against my back. I was cornered. I felt an icy grip around my throat. I was suffocating. Desperation took over. I grabbed the fireplace iron poker and swung wildly at it. I managed to break free and ran for the door, followed closely by the investigator. I grabbed my car keys and left the property. The investigator went back the next day with his colleagues to retrieve the equipment and recordings. He later told me that the spirit we encountered was likely a demonic entity brought forth by the Walton family's rituals. He advised me to stay far away from the house, and I have. That night, after we left the house, the recordings showed the entity destroying all the furniture. We could hear glasses smashing as it threw the furniture against the window, armoires, and mirrors. The property was wrecked, and it was unsafe for anyone to live there. I shared a copy of the recording with the letting agent and advised her I was terminating the lease. I left my job and moved back home, putting as much distance between me and that place. But the nightmares persist, and sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the whispers. I still can't believe what happened. My name is Alex, and I need to share this with you because I can't keep it to myself anymore. Last fall, my friend Sarah, Mark, and I decided to rent a house for a weekend getaway. We found a charming place on Maple Street. It had been recently refurbished and looked perfect for a relaxing escape from the city. The first day was uneventful. We unpacked, made dinner, and enjoyed the quiet atmosphere. The house was cozy, with modern furnishings and a well-kept garden. It seemed like the perfect spot to unwind. But that night, things started to feel off. It began with small things. The lights flickered occasionally, and there was a cold draft in the kitchen that we couldn't explain. Sarah joked about the house being haunted, but we all laughed it off. It wasn't until later that night, when we were all in bed, that the real disturbances began. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of footsteps. They were light, like those of a child, pattering down the hallway outside my room. At first, I thought it was one of my friends, but when I got up to check, the hallway was empty. I felt the chill run down my spine and quickly returned to my room, locking the door behind me. The next morning, over breakfast, I mentioned the footsteps. Sarah and Mark exchanged uneasy glances before admitting they had also experienced strange occurrences. Mark heard faint sobbing coming from the garden, and Sarah's bedroom door had creaked open on its own in the middle of the night. We decided to investigate. Sarah started researching the house's history online, while Mark and I checked out the garden. It didn't take long for Sarah to find something disturbing. She discovered that a little girl named Emily had lived in the house years ago. She had been murdered by her stepfather and buried in the garden. Her body was found months later by her loyal dog, which had dug up her remains. Police had arrested her stepfather, and her mother had died of a drug overdose shortly after. As Sarah read aloud the details of Emily's tragic story, a sense of dread filled the room. It felt as if the temperature had dropped significantly, and we could almost hear faint, childlike whispers around us. We were all shaken, but we tried to brush it off, as our imaginations running wild. That night, the haunting escalated. We heard laughter, not the joyful kind, but eerie and mocking, echoing through the hallways. Objects began moving on their own. Books flew off shelves and furniture shifted. We could feel Emily's presence growing stronger, more malevolent. It was clear she wanted us to leave. I'll never forget what happened around 3 a.m. I woke to find a little girl standing at the foot of my bed, her eyes dark and hollow, her face twisted in anger. She pointed towards the door, and in a voice that seemed to echo from all around, she said, "Get out." I bolted from my bed, and as I ran down the hallway, I saw Mark and Sarah doing the same. We didn't need to exchange words. We knew we had to leave. We quickly packed our bags, not caring about what we left behind, and fled the house. As we drove away, I glanced back and saw a shadowy figure standing in the upstairs window, watching us. We later learned that many people had moved in and out of that house over the years, never staying long. Its dark history was too much to bear, and Emily's spirit was too vengeful. We cut our trip short and found a hotel to stay in for the rest of the weekend, but none of us could shake the feeling that Emily was still with us, ensuring we never returned. Emily's anger and sorrow have bound her to that house, and she'll do anything to keep intruders out.